Watch this.
The pandemic is over, according to our president. What pandemic? Oh, the COVID one, which about a year ago was taking the lives of dozens of Idahoans a day. Maybe you thought it ended a while ago. Well, there's a part of our society that says that declaration and assumption may be too soon. It's Banned Books Week, a 40-year national tradition that's fighting book censorship. And this year, we have a personal tie. The Boise River District is packed with distinct history, but it has certainly changed a lot over the years. This week, one of the last houses standing is being saved to preserve that long history. It was almost exactly a year ago, to the day, when hospitals across the entire state were operating under crisis standards of care because of COVID-19. It was the first time Idaho faced such a situation when access to health care was being determined by your risk of imminent death. This was happening despite the coronavirus vaccine being available for 9 months prior. Photojournalist Kevin Esslinger and I were granted access to the St. Alphonsus Emergency Department, their COVID care floors, and their intensive care unit, which at the time was filled almost exclusively with COVID patients. On September 23rd, 2021, our hospitals were overwhelmed. Yes, people do die on the COVID floor without ever making it to the third floor. The ICU,
Do you want this hand scroller?
where for the third time this morning, a code blue has been called for a COVID patient. An alarm that calls medical staff from several units across St. Al's. And for nearly half an hour, all of their attention is attuned to this one room, working and hoping to bring someone back to life.
Watching you guys work, it was an emotional experience for me. How do you do this?
A couple of things. This is what I was trained to do. It's what we were all trained to do. It's not that the death doesn't affect us, right? We're not robots. We all tear up, go home and cry to our family members at various times. And then, I've said this before, you know, this is when you feel like you're doing this in the context of a team, and that idea that you're not alone doing this, that helps a little as well. Because you saw I wasn't alone in there. A bunch of people ran in to help.
They do this every time.
Oh yeah, it's daunting. And our team's struggling, right? There's this this moral distress that's happening amongst healthcare workers, amongst physicians, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, respiratory therapists, nurses, CNAs. All of us are feeling this extra weight of emotion and moral distress because so many of our patients are unvaccinated and dying because they chose not to get vaccinated.
Do you see the light at the end of the tunnel at all?
No.
You don't?
No. And that's heartbreaking for me to have to say. I did when I got my vaccine in December of 2020. That was my light at the end of the tunnel initially. But now I don't know where the end is.
Could we be there now? Well, crisis standards lasted until the end of November 2021, that is, for most of the state, with a few places returning to that standard for about a month at the beginning of this year. Remember that? It seems like so long ago. And if it feels that way to you too, well, then you're likely in agreement with President Joe Biden, who said this last night on 60 Minutes.
Is the pandemic over?
The pandemic is over. We still have a problem with COVID. We're still doing a lot of work on it. But the pandemic is over. If you notice, no one's wearing masks. Everybody seems to be in pretty good shape. And so I think it's changing, and I think this is a perfect example of it.
They were walking around the Detroit car show, the auto show, for the first time in 3 years, which is open to the public. So another example of it could be over. Well, we haven't done a COVID story on the 208 in months. I think it was June was the last one. Our statewide COVID numbers, which we used to wait with bated breath every day at 5 p.m. to see a tally of new cases, new hospitalizations, and new deaths, well, now are only updated maybe 3 days a week, with some health districts not even reporting that consistently. The state COVID website, which hasn't been updated since September 7th, it says, due to severe technical difficulties. I'm not quite sure what that means, but there are some numbers there. But is the pandemic over? That's a question that we asked Andrew Bartline to try to, well, answer today. Andrew?
Well, you're not going to like the answer, Brian,
Okay.
because it's kind of boring and it's hard to say because there's not really consensus on this. This is debatable. There isn't a firm, clean-cut definition for when the pandemic or any pandemic ends. It's sort of a series of signs. We talked with Dr. David Pate on Governor Brad Little's coronavirus work group, and he saw Biden's interview on 60 Minutes last night. He says he disagrees with the president. Pate even says his language can hurt our country's ability to respond to potential new variants.
I cringed. I can't say I'm shocked. He's a politician. We've got elections coming up. So I can understand why politicians would want to say it's over. It's not over.
Why would you say it's not over? You look around and this is what the president said. We're at this car show. Nobody's wearing masks. It feels very normal. Why is it not over?
I don't think we can judge whether a pandemic is over or not by what the human reaction is. The pandemic is more guided by what the virus is doing. And of course, human behavior allows the virus to do its thing. What I'm worried about is what's the real implications of the president of the United States saying the pandemic is over. If the president says the pandemic is over, then rightly the next question from other politicians should be, well, then revoke our public health emergency status. Because if you don't have a pandemic, why do you have that public health emergency? That's where the devastating harm will come. Everything that we're using, which is most, that is currently under an emergency use authorization, that goes away if the public health emergency is revoked. That is antivirals, that is monoclonal antibodies, that is vaccines, and it's even a fair amount of our testing. So that could be really bad.
So what are you seeing in the virus that would lead you to believe it's not over? And what do you have to see until you're going to be comfortable saying, we can pull off the gas pedal here, we're going to be all right?
Look at what's happening with the cases. Now, realize, as we've talked about many times, cases are underreported. But you can look at the cyclical spikes that we see in the United States and in many countries. Those are because of new infections. And you can look at those new cases, you can look at hospitalizations, you can look at deaths, you can look at a lot of things. But when we keep having those spikes, that is not something that has become endemic, it's epidemic at that point.
Dr. Pate did concede that we're in a much better position as a nation than we were a year ago. He attributes a lot of that success to vaccines and vaccines being made available, people getting those vaccines, where many people are comfortable now going out, living normal lives. That's a good sign, according to Idaho State epidemiologist Dr. Christine Hahn, who she also agrees with Pate, but she does say there are some positive signs too. The biggest question that she still wants answered, what's next? Dr. Hahn says she can't know for sure.
This virus, we don't know what's going to happen this fall. We worry that we're going to see a big surge, but maybe we won't. Maybe we'll see a new variant come along. Maybe we won't. So in my book, I think we're not quite there yet. I think COVID is still a problem. It's something we still don't fully understand. We're hopeful that if enough Idahoans get vaccinated, we won't see a lot of sickness. We won't see a lot of people in the hospitals, but we just don't know yet.
So, Brian, everybody likes to compare COVID to the flu per se. Now, the biggest difference right now, they know what flu season's going to look like going into it, our health experts. But there's not a consensus on what's going to happen with COVID in the fall. There are people that advise President Biden at the White House that Pate referred me to some of their predictions. They think there's going to be a really bad spike. There's some other people that think it's not going to be bad at all. So there's not really consensus. They don't know what to expect. And if you can't expect it, they say the pandemic's not over.
Well, that, as going with what Dr. Hahn said, it is cyclical. We could see that spike in the fall, but what we're not seeing with the vaccine are the hospitalizations and the death rates that we did see a year ago today.
Yeah, numbers have gone down, and that's encouraging. Pate and her both said that.
All right. Thank you very much, Andrew. All right, well,
we
let's move on.
think it's important that more people read more books.
We kind of put our art on stage and on the page to fight this kind of, this relative oppression, if you will.
It's not like all these books were just going to fall off the shelves and hit some kid on the head. we have a right to read these stories.
Okay, so those are some of the voices that we heard over the last several months when this big uproar about opposing books in Nampa School District, banning these books. Remember, back in May, Nampa School Board voted to permanently ban 22 books from the district's libraries for allegedly containing pornography, according to the board meeting document and according to the one parent who complained about it. So why are we reminding you of this? Well, because yesterday was the first day of Banned Books Week. It's a whole week to celebrate the freedom to read and bring awareness to the threats to free speech. This year's theme, Books Unite Us, Censorship Divides Us. You know, book banning has been a hot topic recently, but book bans, nothing really new. Remember the moral majority from the 1980s? So the American Library Association remembers it as well, which is why they set aside this week and have celebrated it since 1982. And for the past 4 decades, librarians, booksellers, authors, teachers, and the like, they've come together to support the freedom to seek and express ideas, even those considered unconventional. And the books focused on this week have all been targeted for removal or restriction. This year's event might have a little more involvement from our community over the controversy over those 22 banned books from the Nampa School Board. Some of those books include The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, and The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini. At their last meeting, the last school board meeting, Nampa School Board decided to table the discussion to figure out how to handle future book complaints. So those books are still not on Nampa School shelves. And should someone else bring up another book, I guess they'll just try to handle it the same way, I guess. Back to this year's celebration, there's a familiar name involved, and it's newly appointed Boise School Board Trustees member and Boise High School student, Shiva Rajbandari. He's on the Kids Are All Right Youth Activists on Fighting Censorship panel, which hosted a Facebook live stream discussion this afternoon. Rajbandari said he's honored to be joining incredible youth activists to talk about why book bans are such a threat to our democracy and what can be done to fight back. ALA's Office of Intellectual Freedom said they found 729 challenges to library, school, and university materials and services last year, just last year alone. And because of that, more than 1,590 books were challenged or removed in 2021. Worth pointing out, most of those books were by or about Black or LGBTQ plus people, if that gives you any idea where they're coming from.
This is the last single-family home still standing on River Street.
Which is why the Hayman House is being saved for the future, a reminder of the density and diversity that once called the River District home. Also worth remembering, you can be part of the 208 conversation. Just text us at this number, 208-321-5614. Send us your comments, your questions, and your clever complaints. And if you hurry, and if it's clean and concise, we might even have time to share it at the end of today's show. Irma Andre Madri Heyman was born in Nampa in 1907. She was 12th in the line of 13 children born to Charles and Amanda Andre. Now, let's be honest. Other than being an extra and much-needed hand on the dairy farm and the family band, both of which the Andres had. She played piano. If you're 12 out of 13 kids, well, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot you could probably do to distinguish yourself. And Mrs. Heyman didn't really do a whole lot, really, other than living her life exceptionally in its everyday moments. Widowed with 3 kids at the age of 27, Mrs. Heyman faced discrimination with where she worked and where she lived in Boise. She remarried in 1943, and together, 5 years later, those two bought a house just north of the Boise River, 617 Ash Street, although it wasn't their first choice. But that house is now one of the few left standing to remind us of the neighborhood that once stood there. And the city hopes you will take the time to learn about it. Was there a fence around it when you were?
No.
For Dick Madry,
there was a hedge.
The days of running around Boise's River District are still pretty distinct.
Yeah, it brings back a lot of memories, you know, basically, because I grew up here.
He grew up in this stone house on Ash Street, a grandson of Irma Heyman.
There's fence, which is probably pretty close to the end of that concrete there.
This picture was taken when he was about 8 or 9, when this part of town was considered undesirable, except by those who lived here.
In the days as I was growing up, all the streets had houses on both sides of the street. And there were a lot of people down here, you know, of every ethnicity. The Thomases next door, I don't think they ever had a key to their house. They never ever locked the door.
In the early days of Boise, the area near the river was still pretty rural. In the middle of that rose up the River District neighborhood, including the Hayman House, standing since 1907. From the beginning, and for decades to follow, this neighborhood was literally the other side of the tracks, with a spur of the Oregon Short Line still running downtown along Front Street. And back then, less desirable meant more diverse.
It was a working class neighborhood. It was a place where the majority of Boise's black residents lived, and also many immigrants. So from all over the world, from the Basque Country and Russia and Croatia and Japan and Greece.
The reason became evident by the 1940s.
Redlined is the term. There was housing discrimination that made it so a lot of black people and a lot of immigrants were unable to purchase property in any other neighborhood.
Which is how Irma Heyman ended up here, after being declined for a house on the Boise bench.
Yeah, this was a bedroom, and across here, there were closets.
Mrs. Heyman and her second husband, Lawrence, bought this one-bedroom house in 1948. A 3-generation home that, despite its sandstone construction, at times seemed to be bursting at the seams.
6 or 7.
6 or 7?
Yeah.
In a 900 square foot home?
Yeah.
Which is why nearly every room served as a bedroom.
There were times that this was also used as a bedroom, and of course this was a bedroom. I slept on the porch.
And the kitchen, where you can still see memories of Mrs. Heyman, like her heart-shaped rug, served up more than just food.
She would sit right there at that table for a good share of the day, and, you know, read the paper and drink coffee, and, you know, if somebody came in to visit, that's usually where they would sit, at that table. And, you know, whenever I would come down, she'd usually be sitting at that table.
Irma Heyman lived here until 2009. Almost up until the day she died at the age of 102.
She's not famous. She is being celebrated because she lived her everyday life in an exceptional way.
Sold to the city about 4 years ago, the Hayman House has been refurbished by Boise's Department of Arts and History as a highlight of what once was.
This is the last single-family home still standing on River Street. You know, even people who maybe were born in Boise and grew up here might not be aware that this was at one point a neighborhood. And now, you know, there's so much development happening. The neighborhood, part of this neighborhood, is disappearing.
From the original floors and light fixtures, the city hopes to keep this history alive.
The story of this house is a lens through which we can look at the story of the neighborhood.
I want them to know that this was a thriving family community down here. And it really was.
And Dick believes his grandmother would be as proud of this project as she was of her own backyard.
Yeah, she would be very glad that the house is still here.
You know, I asked her grandson, who lived in that house till, well, right before he got married in 1968. I asked him if Irma Heyman was considered the matriarch of the River District. He told me, no, she didn't consider herself that. She just considered herself one of the good citizens of the neighborhood. However, she was known to never turn away any of her neighbors in need, and it was because of her there was a stoplight and a crosswalk put in at 13th and River Streets. Urban renewal in the 1970s completely changed the neighborhood into the industrial and busy intersections we see today. In order to help share Irma Heyman's story and the story of the almost gone neighborhood, the city is going to open the 115-year-old Hayman House to the public this Thursday, September 22nd. There's going to be a formal dedication at noon, and the house will be open until 6 p.m.
After all of our boiling hot temperatures that we had not even just 2 weeks ago, we're finally settling into these final days of summer as fall officially begins on Thursday. 82 degrees right now in Boise. Not our official high just yet for the day today. It may be 83 before it goes down in the books. We'll check in on that coming up during the news at 6. This is our low pressure center that's keeping us underneath that southerly southwesterly flow aloft, keeping our temperatures just a touch above average again tomorrow as well. So we're headed for the mid 80s through most of the Treasure Valley tomorrow afternoon, mid 70s for our mountain valleys, mid 80s down in the Magic Valley. A lot of sunshine to enjoy again, good air quality as well. But the big changes start to come into play for us Wednesday afternoon and evening as thunderstorms roll through the region. Could be some in store for the Treasure Valley as well, followed by a cool down for the first official day of fall, looking and feeling like the beginning of fall before we see more sunshine and a bit of a warm up to above average temperatures once again into the final week of September. We'll be right back with the 208 after a quick break.
All right, final minute of the show. Let's get to your comments you sent in today, like this one from Chris. Why are we ignoring reality? I know more people who are getting COVID now than I did 6 months ago. We need to resume reporting current numbers on a regular basis. That's a lot. Yes, the pandemic is over. Thanks to anti-maskers and anti-vaxxers, we are and will be in an endemic. So sad, says Lori in Boise, meaning we're going to see this keep coming back year after year. I think that was kind of the idea from the beginning, though. I went to the doctor today, and he said doctors believe this year is going to be a terrible one for the flu, since we all practice social distancing and have relaxed doctors and have now relaxed, doctors are warning about the flu, and especially with fewer people wearing masks like we used to. We didn't see a big flu number in 2020 or 2021. This year could be a bit different, though. Mike says the books are banned from access by children, not adults. Not exactly true. Librarians aren't checking IDs to see who can check out books. Again, they're leaving that up to the parents. There's no rule that says they have to. They put books in proper sections according to how the author and the publisher thinks they should be categorized, and even they categorize them as such. But they're not checking IDs when people are checking out books, which is kind of the problem at this point, say a lot of people. Doesn't banning books just draw attention to them and make people want to read them more, asked Lori? That's true. The book Genderqueer has a wait list across the valley. Never did before. We'll see you tomorrow.